There is a moment so small, so quick, that most people never notice it. A fraction of a second where the mind quietly decides whether the next few minutes of your life will be peaceful or filled with anger. It usually begins with something simple, a careless comment, a sarcastic tone, a dismissive laugh that lingers just a little too long. Perhaps someone interrupts you, talks over you, questions your intelligence, or throws a subtle insult wrapped in humor. And in that instant, something ancient wakes up inside the human mind. Your chest tightens, your pulse rises, your thoughts begin forming arguments before the other person has even finished speaking. The body prepares for emotional combat as if defending territory. Most people believe the anger comes from the other person, but that is the first illusion, because anger is rarely created by what someone says. It is created by the meaning we attach to it. And the moment we attach meaning to their words, we hand them something incredibly powerful. Access to our mood, our focus, our inner peace. And most people give this access away dozens of times a day without even realizing it. A stranger's rude comment ruins their morning. A co-worker's criticism occupies their mind all afternoon. A family member's careless remark echoes in their thoughts long after the conversation ends. By the end of the day, their mind feels crowded with emotional debris left behind by other people. But here is the uncomfortable truth that philosophers, strategists, and masters of human psychology have quietly understood for centuries. The moment someone can control your anger, they control you. This is why emotional discipline has always been considered one of the most dangerous forms of power. Not loud power, not aggressive power, but silent power. Because the person who cannot be easily provoked becomes incredibly difficult to manipulate. Watch carefully. In any argument, any workplace disagreement, any tense family conversation, and you will notice something fascinating. There are usually two types of people in the room. One reacts quickly, their voice sharpens, their body language tightens. They feel the urgent need to defend themselves, to explain, to correct the perceived disrespect. The other person does something different. They pause, not out of weakness, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand something about human psychology that most people overlook. Reaction is the currency of provocation. When someone throws an insult, a criticism, or a challenge in your direction, they are unconsciously asking for a transaction. They are offering emotional energy and expecting you to return it. Anger for anger, defensiveness for accusation, drama for drama. Most people accept this transaction instantly, almost automatically. But when you refuse the exchange, something strange happens. The emotional tension has nowhere to go. The person who expected a reaction suddenly finds themselves speaking into empty air, and this absence of reaction creates a psychological imbalance that many people cannot handle. Because human beings are deeply uncomfortable when their attempts to provoke emotion fail, it disrupts the social script they expected. Think about the last time someone tried to irritate you. Maybe they questioned your competence in front of others. Maybe they mocked something important to you. Maybe they tried to embarrass you subtly in conversation. Now imagine responding with absolute calm, no raised voice, no defensive explanation, no emotional shift in your tone, just quiet composure, perhaps even indifference. In that moment, something unusual begins happening inside the other person's mind. They expected friction. Instead, they found silence. And silence in situations where anger was expected is deeply unsettling because it forces the other person to confront something they rarely anticipate. Their influence over you doesn't exist. But mastering this calm is not about pretending emotions don't exist. That misunderstanding is where many people fail. True emotional discipline is not suppression, it is observation. Imagine standing beside a river instead of being carried away by it. The water flows rapidly, thoughts appear, emotions rise and fall. Irritation, frustration, anger. They all pass through the mind like currents. Most people jump straight into the river. They become the anger. Their voice changes, their posture stiffens, their mind races with arguments and imagined comebacks. But the disciplined mind simply watches the current move. It notices the first spark of irritation, the slight tightening in the chest, the impulse to interrupt or defend. And instead of obeying that impulse, it pauses. That pause, that tiny moment of awareness, is where emotional freedom lives. Because once you begin observing your emotions instead of instantly acting on them, something remarkable happens. You start noticing how predictable human behavior actually is. The coworker who constantly criticizes others often fears being judged themselves. The person who makes sarcastic jokes at your expense may secretly crave attention. The relative who constantly questions your decisions might simply be projecting their own regrets. When you begin seeing these patterns, insults lose much of their personal sting. They stop feeling like attacks and start looking like symptoms. And this shift in perspective is one of the most powerful psychological tools you can develop, because when you stop interpreting every negative comment as a personal threat, your emotional reactions naturally begin to soften. Suddenly, many situations that once triggered anger start feeling almost predictable. You begin recognizing the same behavioral patterns repeating in different people. The chronic critic, the attention seeker, the subtle manipulator who tries to provoke reactions, the person who thrives on emotional drama. Once you can see these patterns clearly, responding with anger begins to feel strangely unnecessary, almost like arguing with a script you've already read, and that awareness creates psychological distance. Instead of being pulled into every emotional confrontation, you start choosing which situations truly deserve your energy, because attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Every moment you spend mentally replaying someone's insult is a moment they continue occupying space in your mind. And most of the time, they are not even thinking about you anymore. But the mind, when left unchecked, loves to replay emotional events. It constructs imaginary arguments, perfect comebacks that arrive hours too late, entire conversations that exist only in your head. And by the time you realize it, a 5-second comment from someone else has stolen hours of your mental peace. Learning to interrupt this pattern is where emotional mastery begins, not by forcing yourself to ignore things, but by questioning them. Ask yourself something simple the next time someone's words irritate you. Is this situation truly important? Or is my ego demanding a reaction? The answer is often surprising, because many conflicts are not about justice or truth. They are about pride. Someone says something careless, and the mind immediately insists that your reputation must be defended. But the strange irony is that the louder you defend your pride, the more power you give to the person who challenged it. Calmness, on the other hand, sends a very different signal. It communicates quiet confidence. It suggests that your sense of self does not depend on winning every small argument, and people notice that more than you might expect. In fact, emotional stability is one of the strongest unconscious signals of confidence. Think about the calmest person you know, the one who rarely seems shaken by criticism, the one who listens before responding, the one who doesn't feel the need to prove themselves in every conversation. There is something strangely compelling about that type of presence. Not intimidating, but grounded, because emotional control creates an aura of inner stability that others instinctively respect. But the most profound benefit of learning not to react impulsively is internal. Your mind becomes quieter. You stop carrying emotional residue from one conversation into the rest of your day. Small frustrations stop accumulating like invisible weight on your shoulders. You begin waking up with a sense of mental space instead of replaying yesterday's arguments. And inside that space, clarity grows. Clarity about which relationships truly matter. Clarity about what deserves your attention. Clarity about how little influence most outside opinions actually deserve. Because the truth is simple but difficult to accept. Not every opinion deserves authority in your mind. Some voices are simply noise. The internet is full of them. Social environments are full of them. Even families are sometimes full of them. And if you allow every one of those voices to affect your inner state, your emotional life becomes permanently unstable. But when you become selective about which voices you respect, something shifts. Criticism from people whose judgment you admire still matters, but careless negativity from strangers loses its weight. Their words pass by like distant traffic outside a window. You hear them, but they no longer disturb your peace. This shift is subtle, but once it begins, your relationship with anger starts changing permanently. Situations that once triggered frustration begin to feel less urgent. People who once irritated you become easier to understand, and gradually you develop something rare in the modern world: emotional sovereignty, the quiet understanding that your inner state belongs to you alone. Not to strangers, not to critics, not to anyone who happens to cross your path on a difficult day. And once you begin protecting that inner space, something fascinating happens. The world around you doesn't necessarily become kinder. People are still impatient. Opinions are still loud. Provocations still exist. But your experience of those things becomes lighter, less personal, less consuming. And eventually, you notice something that surprises many people who practice this mindset long enough. The less reactive you become, the more respect you quietly earn from others, not because you demanded it, but because composure signals control, control over emotions, control over reactions, control over the only territory that truly belongs to you, your inner world. And when someone realizes they cannot easily disturb that inner world, their behavior toward you begins to change. Because calmness has a strange psychological effect. It makes manipulation feel pointless. It makes drama feel awkward. And it forces people to interact with you on a more grounded level. But there is one final realization that makes this mindset almost unbreakable. A realization that changes how you see anger itself. Because anger is not always your enemy. Sometimes it is simply a signal that a boundary has been crossed, or that something important to you has been challenged. The mistake most people make is acting on that signal immediately. The disciplined mind does something different. It listens, but it waits. It asks a quiet question before responding. Is this situation worth my peace? Because peace, once you begin valuing it deeply, becomes far more precious than the temporary satisfaction of winning an argument. And when you start living from that place, something remarkable happens. Other people's behavior stops feeling like a personal attack and starts looking more like a reflection of their own state of mind. Anger becomes easier to observe, provocation becomes easier to ignore, and slowly, without forcing it, you become someone who is incredibly difficult to disturb. Not because the world stopped testing you, but because you finally learned something most people spend their entire lives missing. Your peace of mind was never theirs to control in the first place.